professional archaeologist and a San Luis Valley, Colorado native. She is currently the owner/archaeologist of Martorano Consultants LLC in Longmont. She has over 40 years of experience in cultural resource management in Colorado and the Rocky Mountain region. Marilyn holds a BA from Adams State University and an MA in anthropology from Colorado State University. Her research interests include culturally modified trees, the archaeology of early Hispano settlements, and the Old Spanish National Historic Trail in the San Luis Valley, and the newly identified prehistoric artifact type in Colorado, lithophones, and ancient musical instruments made of rock. Marilyn received the 2015 Colorado State Archaeologist Award for her work with culturally modified trees, and a 2018 History Colorado Stephen H. Hart Award for archaeological work at the Bromley, I'm going to butcher these two names, Kozuma and Hishinuma Farm. And is that right?
That's right.
Okay, hey. And 2019 History Colorado Award for archaeological work on the historic Terrial National Register of Historical Places Rural District nomination. In 2021, Marilyn received the History Colorado Stephen H. Hart Award for lithophone research at Great Sand Dunes National Park and Preserve in the San Luis Valley. Please welcome Marilyn Martorano.
We're still a little paranoid. I'm still a little paranoid.
Okay.
Very comfortable.
Okay. Will that stay?
It's up to you.
Okay.
Stays on my head. I don't have any hair.
Oh,
Got her done?
Yep.
Okay.
how's that? Okay. Thank you very much for having me, and thank you for coming this evening. Many years ago, we identified a number of really unique and interesting shaped groundstone artifacts in the museum collections at Great Sand Dunes National Park and Preserve, and from other areas around the San Luis Valley. And I'm sure a lot of you know where the San Luis Valley is, but just in case, there's a map and you can see Great Sand Dunes and the valley. The artifacts that we were looking at are very long. They're carefully shaped through pecking and grinding and made from stone. For example, the one shown on the right there is over 2 feet long and weighs 9 pounds. Our crews call this one the standard 2-footer. Some had been referred to in writing or labeled in museum collections or displays as pestles, roller monos, kneading stones, digging tools, hide-working tools, or various types of axes. We just didn't know what these were. We thought maybe they were some kind of giant pestle that was worked in a circular motion in a pestle. And we thought, well, maybe the long one was a giant mono used to grind things. But what happened is we actually examined these artifacts under a microscope and looked for evidence of that type of use, either crushing or grinding. There were no striations, and there was no evidence they had been used up and down. So we just didn't know what they were. They were so large and heavy. It just didn't make sense that someone had made these and spent so much time shaping them just for a utilitarian purpose, when in fact, as you know, you can go pick up a cobble in the river or near the river and use it to grind. You don't have to spend a year, pecking and making a shape like that. So the function remained a mystery, and we put them back in the museum drawers at the dunes. Then a few years ago, a colleague of mine and I actually get to say, he is here tonight. Dave Killam, put up your hand. Stand up, stand up. Stand up, Dave. he sent me a YouTube video of a French researcher, Eric Gontier. You can see his photo here. He had found numerous similar artifacts from Africa in a collection in the Museum of Man in Paris. And these artifacts had been collected by French soldiers in the early 1900s in the Sahara Desert in Africa. And they didn't know what these were either. They didn't know what they were for. But Mr. Gontier was a jeweler, and he just happened to get his little jeweler's hammer up, and he tapped on them, and he couldn't believe it because guess what? They made musical notes. So he realized they were lithophones. So what are lithophones anyway? Litho is Greek for stone, and phone means sound. So a lithophone is a musical instrument consisting of a purposely selected rock. Oftentimes it's formally shaped, that's tapped, or you can also rub on them to make musical sounds. So I saw this video of Mr. Gontier, and we were returning these artifacts to the park. The next day, I was by myself at home, and I thought, well, no other archaeologist is going to see me tapping on these things. And so my youngest daughter is a percussionist, and she had a whole basket of mallets. And so I grabbed a couple mallets. I set up some of the artifacts that we had, just like Mr. Gontier had, with little pieces of foam. And I tapped on them, and I just couldn't get over it because they played musical sounds. And it actually made the hair on my arms stand up because I thought, wow, maybe no one has heard these in perhaps thousands of years. So I got really excited, and I actually took the artifacts back. Dave Killam knows this. And I had them in the back of the truck, and I showed the cultural resource manager at the park. I said, you want to see something really weird and cool? And so I actually played some of them in the back of the pickup truck, and he couldn't get over it either. And so he said, we've got to learn more about these. Let's try and get a grant. We'll help you. We'll support you to get a grant. So that's kind of how it all happened. And I like to blame Dave over there because he was the one that got me thinking, maybe they are something different that we had never considered. So after I did a lot of research, I realized that lithophones aren't really some new unknown type of artifact, except maybe to us. They're actually well known. They're found throughout the world, including Europe, the Far East, Africa, the South Seas, South America, China, Vietnam, to just name a few places. And some have been dated to over 6,000 years old. So there are two basic types of lithophones, stationary and portable. Examples of stationary lithophones are shown in this slide here. Some really interesting ones, stalactite lithophones on the upper left there in caves. You've probably seen stalactites in caves. They've found stalactites with marks on them, evidence that they were being played. And so that would be fantastic to hear a sound like that, a musical sound in a cave, because the acoustics, I think, would be really interesting. There are also other large stationary lithophones, like these boulders that you can see here from Africa and Scotland. And my understanding is that the little indentations, the little cupules that you see there play different notes. And so people can tap on that boulder and they'll play different notes. Here are a few more stationary lithophones. In the upper left photo, there's an example of one of many, many stationary boulder lithophones referred to as bell rocks. If you've ever been to Arizona, there are a lot of petroglyphs, so pecked rock art designs, especially flowers, and they're associated with these rocks. And you can see the yellow arrow shows where someone has been hitting the stone, hitting the boulder, and making a sound. In the upper right photo, there's an example of a large stationary but positioned lithophone. So somebody took that rock, the large rock, set it up on the two smaller rocks, and then they play it with the rocks that are sitting on top of it. And there are actually two places in the US. In the bottom two photos there, you can see one is in Pennsylvania. It's called Ringing Rocks Park. And the other one is in Montana. It's called the Ringing Rocks. It's actually on BLM land. And you can go to both of those locations, take your rock hammer, and they'll let you play the boulders. And that's what these people are doing here. They're just walking around and playing the boulders. And if you can't get there, I haven't been there yet, but you can go online and just search Ringing Rocks, and you can see videos of people playing those boulders. It's really interesting. In these photos, portable lithophones are found around the world as well. Some are made of unmodified or minimally modified rocks, and others are highly modified. And they could have been played different ways, like the ones in Ecuador in the upper left-hand photo there. You can see they were suspended vertically and then tapped. Others were suspended horizontally, like the examples from Ethiopia in the upper two right photos, more like a big gong. And the really highly modified ones shown on the bottom there in China and South Korea are made of, anyone want to guess? Jade? Jade, yes. Those are made of jade, and you can see how they're hung on a rack and played. Other portable lithophones include suspended lithophones like the bell stones shown on the left there. They have a hole in them, and they're played on a lot of, or they were played on a lot of islands, Hawaiian islands. So if you ever go to Hawaii, see if you can find some of these lithophones in one of the museums. And kiva bells are another type of lithophone made from unmodified or minimally modified stones. There are examples in the upper right photo there, and they're found in pueblos in the Southwest. A lot of times they were supposedly also strung up and played vertically. And on the lower right there, you can see there's a cache of what they call ringing stones that were found in a subfloor deposit in a late dating Pueblo site in New Mexico. And I think there are a lot more of them found down there. Sometimes they're in reports, but they don't say what they are, but they sure look like lithophones. Other portable lithophones were, or actually still are, played horizontally like a xylophone. Somebody was asking me about this before. And the gal on the upper left there from Vietnam is playing these giant stones in Vietnam, and they still play those today. And you can actually do a Google search and see her playing those, and she just beats the heck out of them. And they kind of bounce up and down, but they're on a rope. And so they're held off of the table so that they have a lot of resonance. But it's really fun to watch her play because they still play them over there today. Some other portable lithophones were played on the ground, like the ones in Togo, the guy on the right there. And you can see what those instruments look like with the rock that they were playing them with. They actually found a cache of lithophones in Vietnam. This is what they look like when they found them. Now, whether they were playing them that way or if that was just how they were stored, we aren't real sure. So not all the lithophones are ground stone, like the ones up here and the ones we were studying in the valley. There are other lithophones that are very large flaked stone lithophones. For example, the one in Belize, you can see the hand for scale there. Look how big that was. So those were actually lithophones as well. But instead of grinding and cucking them, they flaked them. So they were flaked tools. And on the right there, there's a photo of a group of flaked stone artifacts found in a group or a cache in Labrador that have been interpreted as lithophones. And what's interesting is they're different lengths. So what do you think that means for sound? Yeah, they play different notes, right? Just like a xylophone. So just something to think about, just because you find a flaked stone tool, it may not have been for killing something, right? We tend to assume a lot of things as archaeologists. Look at this large slab, these large slab lithophones from Cambodia. I can't imagine what those sound like. It'd be, yeah, those aren't. Yeah, I don't know how portable they are, unless you had a lot of people to carry your stuff. In 2013, there was an article written in American Antiquity, which a lot of you are probably familiar with that journal. And the guy that wrote the article was Duncan Caldwell, and he talked about lithophones found in the northeastern US, and you can see a picture of some of them over there. And those were some of the first lithophones described in the US. And some of the ones that we found look somewhat similar to that, right, Dave?
Yeah.
From Great Sand Dunes. And he said he thought lithophones were a new class of artifacts in most of North America. And as far as I know, no one has talked about lithophones here in Colorado, at least, until whenever that was, 10 years ago now. So it really is sort of a new concept, but I like it because it makes us think out of the box and not just assume function by looking at something. So I think that was the lesson that I learned. So in 2016, the Park Service supported us. We got a grant through History Colorado State Historical Fund and chose 22 potential lithophones. You can see here. A lot of these are from Great Sand Dunes National Park, and others were from local collectors who let me borrow some of their artifacts and just wanted to learn about them. So what we did is started measuring them. The lengths varied from 9 inches, so the ones on the very bottom are about 9 inches long, and they range up to the larger ones like the standard 2-footer, and another one there on the left. Those were the bigger ones. There's a lot less variation in width. You can look at those and they're all kind of a similar width from about 2 to 3 inches wide. The body shape, if you look at them in a cross section, they really were varied. Some of them were rounded, almost cylindrical. Some were kind of a flattened oval shape, but they all looked pretty similar to each other. They have different ends. You can see the ends on them. Some are pretty pointed. A lot of them come to sort of a beveled point. The good ones that make the best sound don't have a flat end. So they aren't like a pestle. And if they have a flat end, they don't make the greatest sound. And I'll explain that later. And pretty soon you will be an expert on the physics of sound waves. Okay, I had to learn all about that also. So these weighed from about 2 to 10 pounds. The material types, a lot of people want to know what they're made out of. They're very dense stone. So they're either volcanic or metamorphic. Most of the ones that we study from Great Sand Dunes are granitic. Some of those were also basalts. Other artifacts are made out of petrified wood. Do you remember seeing petrified wood wind chimes? They used to sell them at all the curio shops. Well, petrified wood, there's one up here, a piece of petrified wood, and you can try playing it and it makes a great sound. One other type of wood or rock that people made lithophones out of is phonolite. So you just think of phono, what does that mean? Sound. So phonolite is a rock that also makes good sound. So what I wanted to do is study each of these artifacts and describe them and take photos, trying to understand how they might have been made, why they were shaped different ways, and how they may have been played. This is one of the bigger ones. It's thin and undulating in the side view. The second photo down there, you can see it's kind of curved like that. And we don't know why. Was that something intentional for sound? That's a question that maybe some young student somewhere can answer. They have different end shapes. A lot of times the ends are different from each other. This one has hundreds of little peck marks. All the white that you see there is like a caliche, but it's in the peck marks. So you can see all those little white indentations. Those are peck marks. So people were shaping these and making them a certain shape and pecking them very carefully. You'd have to peck them hard, with force. But if you did it too hard, of course, it would break. So they must have figured that out and spent a lot of time doing that. And as far as musicians, who's a musician in here? I know there's one guy. Oh, come on, there's others. But anyway, this one plays an A sharp and a D when tapped, and you can also rub on it, and it's makes a great sound when you rub it with friction. This is another one. It's long, it's over 2 feet long, and it weighs over 9 pounds. And it's almost round in cross section, you can see in the bottom there. But if you look at the side view, it tapers toward one end. And some of the researchers that have studied lithophones think they actually did that on purpose. So if they were playing it across their legs, it wouldn't roll off. If it was too rounded, it might just roll off. I don't know. This one plays an F sharp and a G sharp for our musician in the front who admitted it. And just looking at the body forms here, you can kind of see the curved and undulating shapes of the lithophones, and then there's a straight one on the bottom. Again, we don't know why, if that was just the form of the original rock and they left it, or perhaps they made it that shape for some reason, maybe to get a better musical sound. This photo on the left, again, talking about the peck marks, you can really see all the hundreds and hundreds of peck marks if you take a close-up view like the one on the left there. So somebody spent a lot of time hitting these, but not breaking them. And the artifact on the right is really interesting because it has a residue on it, and we think it's possibly ochre. Does anybody know what ochre is? Have you seen it on different artifacts? It's actually a natural pigment, and it comes in different shades of sort of red, yellow, orange. And it was used a lot ceremonially. Sometimes they sprinkled it on the dead, or they put it on pots when they were killing them, for example, things like that. And so we aren't quite sure if that's what this is, but it sure looks like something was applied on there on purpose. Again, looking at the surface variations, most of them were pecked into the nice kind of cylindrical shape, but some of them, like this one on the top there, it was pecked. There's some peck marks on there, but it was left sort of roughened. But what I realized when I was playing it with friction, when you drag your mallet across it, if it's rough, it makes a lot more sound. So they may have done that on purpose. The artifact in the lower right photo there, if you look, you can see there's sort of an oval indented shape on the body, and there are numerous striations when you look really closely there, and they're parallel to the length of the body. And so what we're thinking is someone was playing it in this kind of a motion, and it may have left these striations going across it. The one on the left there has a number of impact marks. And our guess is that someone was playing this artifact with a rock mallet. So you can see the impact marks. That's exactly where you'd play this one. And it's up here, so you can see it. And you can actually try playing it with the mallets. And you'll notice that you get the best sound right where those marks are located. Some of them show evidence of being highly polished. Now, this took a while to get something that polished. So why did they do that? We don't know. We still have a lot of questions. We can guess maybe it made a better sound if it was really smooth like that, or maybe they just did it because it was beautiful. And so we don't know. So we've learned a lot, but we have a lot of questions, which is okay. We also found 2 lithophones that have peck designs along the body. And the one on the left, you can see there are 2 sets of zigzag peck lines that you can see. There are actually 5 sets on this artifact. And that one is up here in the front also. So if you come up and look closely, maybe you can pick those out. Again, we don't know what that means. A lot of times zigzag lines have a meaning, something like lightning, or, you know, they could have all kinds of meanings. But you wouldn't put zigzag lines on something you were going to just grind corn with, because it would be gone right away. And on the right, you can see a couple of angled lines. And then there are also 2 lines that extend around the lithophone. And we don't know, were those markings of an individual, or did they have some sort of ceremonial meaning? And if you've heard archaeologists talk, if we don't know what something is, we say, oh, it's probably ceremonial, you know. So you'll hear me say that a lot because we don't know. And if you don't know, a lot of times you say, well, maybe it was ceremonial. And it could be true. So here's the nitty gritty. How the heck do these make sounds? The sound travels through a lithophone as sound waves when they're tapped. And it's all based on the physics of sound and how it travels through different materials. And this is something I thought I would never want to know about. And I've talked to various people who understand sound waves and how they work. And it's actually pretty interesting. So when you tap on an artifact, like a lithophone, you tap on the end, there are 2 sets of sound waves that come out. You can see the sound waves marked with that red arrow there. And they cross each other twice when it goes through the lithophone. So the place where they cross are called the acoustical nodes or dull zones. And now you're really smart because you know all this. But the key to that is that those 2 spots, or those dull zones, are the only 2 places on the lithophone you can either set them up on a rope, you can hang them, you can hold them. And if you don't, I'm going to go over here and I'll demonstrate what happens. So I have them marked with a little piece of tape. They're about 25% from either end. So if I hold it here, okay, and if I hold it here, the sound. And that's all because of these sound waves and how they work. Here's another one. Let's see. I'll do this one. You get a workout when you these up. So that's why they either suspended them on that upper node like that, or they hung them this way, but they were always hung or suspended on those 2 nodal locations. And that's why I mark them on here with a little piece of tape, and then I set them on the rope on those two spots. And you can actually find those spots with a mathematical formula if you want, or you can do it by ear actually. So if I play along here, hear how that changes? You can hardly hear it. What's that?
It's like you hit the stud in the wall.
Yeah, exactly. So you can do it by ear. You can do it visually, just by the length. Or you can use a mathematical formula and get your length and then multiply everything out. I like to do it by ear. So it's just fun. Okay. And the way to compare this, see the modern marimba on the right. Maybe some of you have seen a marimba or even a xylophone. Like your kids, if they played a xylophone when they were little, it's the same idea. And you notice that each of the bars on the marimba are attached at those two nodal points. And so that's how it works. And it still works that way today. Okay. So one of the main things we did during this project was do an acoustical analysis. And we used software. You can see the software we were using on the right there, and played each lithophone, recorded it, and then they actually played two notes at least. And I'll demonstrate that in a minute. And then we recorded what notes they played, what octave, and the hertz and all of that. So each one of these lithophones that we were testing play at least two notes. And they play, you can see when you come up here and you become a rock star, you can try and you can hear the two notes, and they're not always the same interval from each other. And you can even roll them and play them, and it'll play one note. And as you're rolling it and playing it, it'll play the two notes together, and then it'll play the second note by itself. So it really is sort of, I think, like magic. I mean, even today, for us to understand it all. And so you can imagine if you were a shaman or something, you're playing this rock and you're getting these amazing sounds out of it, and you're getting at least two different notes. I think it would be awesome, sit around a fire and here you are sort of doing this magic with sound. Okay, this is the one thing I think is pretty interesting. When I do roll this, you'll hear the two notes played together, and it may make you cringe because we, in our Western music, we aren't used to hearing those sounds. And whereas in some music around the world, they actually play music that sounds like that. So if I turn this and play it, listen. Hear how it's playing. I mean, it kind of makes you go, ah, or it makes us go that way. And then it goes to the second note, right? And then you can go back and you hear, and for our musician,
It's a minor second.
it's really interesting, actually, from a musical standpoint, that you can get these overtones and you can get the two notes played together and then the two notes played separately. And so whether they did that much, we don't know. Hear that?
Sounds like chopsticks.
Yeah, it does. And then you can also, like I was telling you, you can get a sound like this. The rougher it is, the more sound you get. And if you play them with a rock, you get more sound. But because these are real artifacts, I play them with these xylophone mallets. They're composite mallets. So they make a good sound. but they won't produce a new mark on your artifact. So I do have some of the types of natural mallets that people could have used. This is bone. This was dinner at our house one night. And I told my husband, save that. And so they could have used bone and, you know, well, this way, antler. And then, of course, here are rocks. I try to use a small rock. But if they wanted to make a really loud sound, they could have used a big rock. I just don't like to make new marks on here. And then, excuse me, they could have also used wood. I have a boxwood mallet, which you probably know about as a percussionist for playing chimes. The only problem is it's huge. And when I do this for kids, they love that because they think, oh boy. So I got this little toy xylophone mallet that's made of wood, and you know, you can still hear it, but it won't destroy things as much. Okay. So here's the key though. If you think you're going to go home and look in your yard and look at all those rocks you have out there and say, woohoo, I can have a rock concert right there. Probably not, because not all rock make these sounds. It has to be a certain type of density. And for example, this is, anybody want to guess what is this? Mono, but what's it made out of? Sandstone. Okay, this is sandstone. Sandstone is not dense enough to make a good musical sound. Okay, so you can hear it, right? You hear me beating on it, but you don't hear the music, right? And then I call this my potato, but it's just a large cobble, and it's heavy, but it's not the right kind of rock. So again, so people had to find the right kind of rock. And they probably spent a lot of time doing that because they were crazy musicians. And well, I don't know this guy, but okay, he admitted it. My husband's a musician, so I usually can say that, and he doesn't mind. But you know, if you go around looking for rocks, I can see a musician finding a piece of petrified wood like this. This is just a small piece, but it looks like somebody actually put some little, I mean, maybe they were hanging it, but listen to the sound of that. It's really piercing. This is something else. I go hiking now with my family, and they're sorry because I have to tap all the rocks. But I keep mallets in my pack. And so when we go Rocky Mountain National Park, anywhere, I can see Dave Killam, my colleague back there, shaking his head. But anyway, I carry mallets now.
Like you need something else in your pack.
Yeah, yeah. But these are pretty lightweight, so you could get some too. Yeah. But I actually found this one up in the mountains. It's a really funky looking rock. If you want to come and look at this, it's a weird shape. It's probably metamorphic, but it's very dense and it makes a sound. So somebody could have found that, and then perhaps if they didn't want to carry, this is heavy, it's really heavy. So, you know, they call these portable lithophones. And if you're a hunter-gatherer, you probably didn't want to carry around, you know, I mean, you can't eat these. And you can't kill, well, I guess you could kill something with them, but, you know, these were important for other reasons. And so people were making these and taking them places, but they wanted them to be portable. So maybe they found something like this. They realized it made a sound, and then they could spend the winter, you know, pecking it down into a small piece like this. This one is not modified. It's just modified by water.
So it's a lithophone blank.
It's a,
No, I mean.
No, you're right. yeah,
Would be
exactly. It's a lithophone blank. I like that. I just call these natural ringing stones. But I like lithophone blank too. But you can try that as well. So now hopefully when you go walking around, and I know a lot of you are out in the woods a lot, so check out the rocks and tell me what you find. And these mallets don't cost too much. You can get them on Amazon is where I got them. They're xylophone composite mallets, and you can really hit things a lot, and they'll last a long time. Okay. Let's see. So what I wanted to do is try and figure out, like I showed you some of the natural mallets that people could have used easily. They could have easily found, you know, bone, wood, antler. And what I wanted to do is try holding these lithophones in different positions. Holding it from the upper node there and tapping on it. You could also suspend it with a piece of leather, like the very upper right artifact there. This is my daughter. She got to be my lithophone player, and she tried playing these long 2-footers across her knees. And of course, she had the 2 acoustical nodes placed right where her knees were, so it wouldn't muffle the sound. She also did the same thing on her ankles, and it worked as well. And I just like to put them on a rope because I can't sit on the table. And so that works really well and for demonstrating. But you can see the different ways that these could have been played. So as far as the sound they make, for our musician here, who did admit it, the 22 lithophones played a minimum of 57 notes. So that's more than 2 notes per lithophone. And over half of the notes produced are pentatonic. And so if you're a musician, or even if you aren't, the black keys on a piano, those are the pentatonic notes. And pentatonic scales in various forms, it's the most commonly used tonal structure in music around the world. And I just think that's really interesting that these, you think these are seemingly simple rock musical artifacts, but they made them play certain notes. So how did they do that? How do they make them play certain notes? The difference is the length primarily. So the longer ones play a lower note. So as you get shorter, just like on a xylophone. So they could have just shaved off some off the end if they didn't want that note. They wanted a different note. They could do that. You can also take some off the bottom, and that will also affect the sound. But again, they could make the sound they wanted just by changing the shape. Okay. So where did these rocks come from anyway? Well, again, we don't know all the answers, but the geologists at Great Sand Dunes found these large volcanic rocks, columnar rocks shown on the upper left there. He found those coming out of some rock formations at the northern end of the San Luis Valley. And he was able to collect a couple of them for me. And you can set those up on their nodes, and you can actually play those without shaping them. So they could have been played like the Ethiopia lithophones shown on the right there, or maybe that's what these look like originally before somebody shaped them down to make them more portable. The rocks that you see on the lower left there are from stream deposits. And they were actually found by a local resident in the San Luis Valley in the north end. And he was digging a lot of fence post holes, unfortunately for him. But he was a musician, right? So he's digging these holes and he kept hearing rocks hit each other and making sounds. And he was a musician, so what did he do? He picked those up and he put them over here. And he did that for 30 years. And he started saving these. He called them singing rocks. And he didn't really know about lithophones, but he just did this just on his own, being out digging holes. And so it could be that's how that happened with native people. And they're very similar to what are called kiva bells in the Southwest. Most of them that you see on the, well, all of them on the left there are unmodified. They're just modified by nature, by water. And they look very similar to the kiva bells that the folks down in the Southwest used in their kivas. But I just think the fact that he found those recently just shows you how that could have happened in the past. You know, some guy was out there, he needed some artifacts for something, and he also had an ear, a musical ear, and so he put those aside. So a lot of times I'm asked, well, how did they actually figure out the musical sounds? And they didn't take geology class, they didn't take music classes, but how did that happen? And I started thinking about it. You know, people in the past lived out in their environment, in nature, all the time. They weren't like us. They didn't just go out on weekends and go on a little hike. They were out there all the time, and their survival was based on them being able to hear nature, right? What was happening around them. And I just think that's probably how things happened. What really made me think of that was when a friend of mine gave me this book. The cover is on the left there. It's called The Life-Giving Stone. And it's a story about Maya people that still today in Guatemala, these are very remote areas, they still make manos and metates by hand. And they quarry the stone. You can see the guy on the upper right there. He's quarrying a piece of stone off. And then they make these rough cut manos that you can see on the lower right there. And guess what they do? They take all those back to the village, but before they spend all the time shaping them by hand, guess what they do? They may do that too, but they actually tap on them. They listen to the sound, and if they make a certain sound, then they keep them. If they make a different sound, it means they have some sort of internal flaw. And if they spend the time to shape them, they're going to crack. And so that gets thrown out. So it just made me think that people were making stone tools. They have been for so many years. And they were using sound here to make these manos. And so why wouldn't they, if they found a rock that made a really nice sound, I can see the musician in the group snagging that, right? Saying that's not going to be a mono, that's going to be a musical instrument. So we don't know exactly how all that happened, but I think there are some pretty good explanations. Okay, here's the guy I was telling you about, Jeff Shook, with his singing stones. You can see all the rocks he's collected over the years. And those are just naturally shaped rocks. But I showed him how you can put them on rope. And if you go to Salida, you might get to hear him gig with these. He actually takes these out on his gigs and plays the lithophones. So just to show you how it could have happened in the past, I think this is a great example. So we've learned a lot. We still have a lot of questions for example, how did hunter-gatherers use lithophones versus sedentary people? And what are the dates of use? How far back do they go in time? And were they used all over the US, for example? Was it related to ritual or ceremony? You know, that's my key word for we don't know. Or what were they just playing music to enjoy it, just like we do? Of course, most of us love some kind of music. We don't really know. Those are some great questions we have. And what are the sources of the rock? And what can the sounds tell us about the people who made them and maybe even where they came from? Because, you know, when you go somewhere, you have music in your head, right? The music you are used to, if you go somewhere else, you still have your music in your head. So say you came across the Bering Strait, you came down here, you might bring your musical knowledge in your head with you. And then if you wanted to make some rock instruments, you would use that knowledge that you had and make a sound that you were used to. I mean, maybe you make new sounds too, but I just think they can tell us a lot about maybe where people came from. Different cultures had different kind of music. We know that today. And so I just think these are really important and we're still learning a lot. One of the things I'd like to know is where are all the lithophones? Because the San Luis Valley, we know there are lithophones all over there. But that's just because I've been talking about it and we've been working down there. But for example, on the left here, there's an article that was written in the 1950s by a well-known archaeologist. You may have heard his name, Dr. Joe Ben Wheat. He's very well known. He was excavating a site in Arizona, a pit house, and he found a cache of 12 artifacts. This is just a couple of them, but look at what they look like. They look like lithophones to me. He didn't know what they were, and in his report, he said, maybe somebody will figure it out someday. So I hope they collected these because it would be really fun to go to the museum and actually play a set of 12, if that's possible. It looks like a couple of them are broken. There are also a couple other questions I have. For example, the two artifacts on the right there, I ask archaeologists, what are those? And they tell me, oh, that's a celt and an adze. So those were used for cutting. And I say, well, that's interesting. You want to hear how they sound? Because they sound like metal bells. And I think what that means to me is maybe they were multi-purpose tools, or maybe we're just assuming things, and maybe some of these were actually musical instruments and were not what we think they were. So just something to think about. Just don't assume anything. That's what I've learned. This is an example. I've been trying to go to different museums because museums have these and they're mislabeled. And so I'm trying to go to different museums and say, hey, you know, what is that? And they'll say, oh, that's, they call this a, let's see, kneading stone. The top photo shows it in the case. And it took me, I think, 10 years to convince them to remove that from the case and allow us to play it. And they couldn't get over it because it sounds like a metal bell when you play on it. And they had no idea about that. So that's one of the things I'm trying to do is go to museums, look at different collections, and help people learn what they have. Because again, they've just assumed things, or archaeologists told them something, and maybe that's not correct. Here's one that's really interesting. I was telling someone in the group here, we don't really know were most of these played just individually, Or did people perhaps come together at certain times of the year? You know, they gathered certain times of the year. Did everybody bring their lithophones and maybe have a rock concert? I don't know. I think that's possible. We found some of the longer lithophones at Great Sand Dunes were found sticking up out of the ground vertically. So people had cached them. And it's probably because of the weight, but maybe they were coming back every year and playing lithophones together. We don't really know. This article here was written in 1953, and it talks about a group of 23 kiva bells. So those are the more natural lithophones that were found at a Pueblo site in New Mexico. And of course, they don't say anything there about, you know, what the scale was or things like that. But I think that's something that we should be doing, is trying to go find these collections and figure out, get musicians involved and have them figure out the scales they're playing and tell us what that means. So I'd love to find this group if they didn't toss them out. The problem with groundstone, if you're an archaeologist from the old days, in New Mexico, for example, or Arizona, they found so much groundstone that they'd throw it out. So unfortunately, I think a lot of things are gone, but that doesn't mean they didn't keep some more interesting things in the collections. This is something that was just recently sent to me, and I think it's really interesting. These upright artifacts are called stela, if you've ever heard of those. They were found in a looter's pit at the top of the Sun Pyramid at Teotihuacan. And, excuse me, they're made of a green schist, and unfortunately, there's no one standing there. But the larger one weighs 2,000 pounds. Just as a comparison, the biggest one I found is, or studied, is 10 pounds. So my thought is, I wonder if these were lithophones. You know, can you imagine them playing these on the top of a pyramid? I mean, it could be amazing. Excuse me. And looking at other artifacts, it could be lithophones. I don't know if any of you have ever seen these before. They're called turkey tail points. They're found mostly in the northeastern US. And a lot of times they're found in caches or groups, and they're slightly different sizes. And somebody who was studying lithophones looked at these and, excuse me, they said these little notches, which wouldn't make sense if you were hafting them as a tool, because they would just break off, right? They said those would be great for suspending them and playing them. So even though they look like a spear point, and we want to assume that, I don't think we should, because they could be lithophones. And actually, I talked to the New England Antiquities Association, and I mentioned this to them, and one of their members had some of these at home. So he hung them and he played them for me. And it was just amazing. They just rang. So again, it's all our assumptions. You know, when we see something like that, we think, oh yeah, spear point. But maybe we should rethink that, or at least question it. These are some other things that I'm questioning right now. If you've ever heard of a chamahia, has anyone heard of that before? That one's from Chaco Canyon. They're not very common, but they often call them ceremonial hoes. And a lot of times they don't have use wear. You know, if you were using it as a hoe or an axe, it would be all banged up on that end. The material is oftentimes a siltstone, which is known to have musical qualities. And then if you look on this particular one, they took a little bit off toward the top there. It looks like it's almost in the node locations. And so people, archaeologists say, oh yeah, they were hafting that. What if they were hanging it instead? So again, just asking a lot of questions, I think is what we need to do. This is something else I'm really interested in, these jadeite axes. Has anyone seen these in museums in Europe? They're pretty rare. They know they came from the Alps. They actually dug the stone from the Italian Alps, but they found these all over Europe, including near Stonehenge. And they found them in Ireland. They're really rare. Some of them have holes in them, which is really interesting, or they have little notches, but they call them axes. And so I really would love to find one in a museum and see if someone would try tapping it, because especially being jadeite, I'm sure that makes a great sound. So again, ask questions. I think that's what archaeologists should be doing, is asking a lot of questions. In this upper photo, you can see there's a really long lithophone. It's 4 feet long, over 4 feet long. And I like to call it the mother of all lithophones. It's huge. And there's another one probably behind it there on the table. But the interesting thing also is that it was supposedly found with the mammoth skull behind it. Now, we don't know the whole story of this. I'd like to go there. It's, do you know where Truth or Consequences is? It's in a museum there. And so I'd like to go there and work with them and see if we can learn more about this mother of all lithophones. It'd be very interesting to know, was it actually found with the mammoth skull? And if so, where, how was it found and things like that. So could that mean that lithophones have been here in North America since early occupation? That's what the question is for me. And the lower photo there, one thing I'm trying to do is get word out to the general public too, about lithophones. This guy contacted me, and he is from Arizona. He has a rock shop, and his dad found this, what turns out to be a lithophone, in 1910. And he knew it made sounds just by moving it around in his shop, but he didn't know about lithophones. And so I told him how he can test it, and it's an amazing lithophone. So again, I think these are around, but we just need to start looking for them. So hopefully some of you folks can help us do that. Either find one, what I'd really like to do is find one in situ, because most of the ones we have found were picked up, so we don't know the context. And in archaeology, context is everything, right? So we'd love to find one that's in place so we can understand more about how it was used. This is something that happened after the lithophone research began. Turns out this composer, Dr. Michael Udow, the guy on the upper left there, lives about 5 minutes from my house. And so he started coming over and playing these ancient lithophones. And he's a composer, so he decided he would compose a piece for lithophones and orchestra. But not just compose a piece, he actually made a 3-octave lithophone that you see there. And guess what it's made out of? Any guesses? Granite countertop. Yeah. So he found a granite countertop company that was willing to work with him, and he got all these cut, and he actually tuned them. So they had to be very patient because he had to make them a certain length, and if they weren't right, he said, no, you got to take a little more off. And, but anyway, so he made this instrument, he wrote this piece, and it was premiered by the Longmont Symphony Orchestra in 2022. And you can see in the red circle there, those are some of the ancient lithophones that he incorporated into this piece. And then, of course, he used his modern granite countertop lithophone. And then he has instruments from all over the world. And this, the guy on the right there was the featured percussionist. And so he got to play all these really cool instruments as part of this piece. If you're interested, I have a handout up here in the front, or you can actually just do a search for, I think it's Longmont. Anyway, I can help you find the link, but it's a YouTube video, and they interview Mike, me, and the guy who made the stand for the lithophone, and then they actually play the piece on there. And so you can hear them playing, you know, they start out playing the ancient lithophones, and then they go through and they play the countertop, and then all these weird instruments from around the world. So it's kind of fun. So you never know what's going to happen when you do archaeology, you know, who's going to end up at your house. But it's been very fun. So we have a lot of questions, like I said, but that's okay, because that is how science works to me. And that's how archaeology should work. It's not that we learn everything, because we should always have questions, I think. But what it means to me, I think they're really important, because music is sort of that connection to all people around the world. You can speak different languages, but music kind of ties everybody together. And it's sort of the universal language between cultures. So even if we don't speak the same language, we can play music, or we could play our lithophones, and you would still be able to appreciate it in some way. And I think that's why this whole project to me was so important, is thinking about music and how people in the past did not just live to eat every day. You know, we know that, I think, as archaeologists. They were doing different things. Art was important, music was important, but these lithophones are a real great example of what was important to people besides just living to survive. And I think that's why these mean so much, at least to me, because they really embody that whole idea. And that's the end of my little spiel here. Just like to thank Doug and who else worked with me? Carla. Yeah, she emailed me a lot of times, and which was great, because I needed all my questions answered. But here are all the other people that helped support this project. It takes a lot of folks to do something like this. And I'll get back and I'll say, Dave Killam, thank you for starting this whole thing. It's all your fault now. But you know, it takes little ideas, and then people take them forward and support you, and that's how something like this happened. So thank you very much. And you are more than welcome to come up and try being a rock musician. You can play the mono, and then you can play these other instruments. And I even brought a lithophone from Vietnam that you can try playing. And then these are just for fun, but just to show that people made instruments. They made it out of everything. Have you heard these frogs before? Probably. But So anyway, are there questions or answers?
Yeah.
If you have answers, that'd be great too.
Question, not answer.
Okay.
So are all lithophones carved out of naturally occurring singing stones? Or is it possible to take a stone that doesn't naturally make good sound and carve it into one that does?
Okay, the question was, I'm supposed to repeat it. That was a long question.
Sorry.
Can you make a lithophone out of a rock that didn't make a sound to begin with, is basically what you were asking, right? As far as I know, that probably wouldn't work, because even big rocks, you should be able to get a sound out of it. Now, if you wanted to get your big rock and make it smaller, you can make a lithophone maybe this size out of it, but if it doesn't make a sound, it's not going to make a sound. Unless, say, it was lying flat and it was totally muffled. Maybe if you lifted it up or something, you could check it, and if it, but it's still got to make a sound. Yeah.
So what's the smallest one you've ever seen?
Dave, how small is about 9 inches, 8 inches? But you know, like this one, this is actually petrified wood.
Where's that from?
This is from a collection. A guy's parents donated this collection, and I've given a lot of them to CSU. And this one was just in there, and I thought, what the heck is that? But look at it. It looks like somebody may have.
Do you know where it came from? I mean,
I don't know, but this guy lived up near Loveland. So,
could be from any-
yeah, but who knows? But so,
Is
yeah.
that the only petrified wood one you have?
yes,
I've never seen that before.
yeah, that's a new one. That
It has a great.
it's real piercing.
Yeah.
So I figured my kids, you know, I could have used this for, you know, it's dinner time.
That's what I thought they were, maybe just dinner bells.
Yeah.
One use.
Yeah. And actually, the Kiva bells, the ones that were used in the Pueblos, they said in a couple instances, they would hang them in front of the Kiva, and when they wanted the men to come into the Kiva, they would ring the bells. So, yeah, so maybe dinner, well, not dinner, but
It's like the chow bell and the old ranch.
yeah, it is. Same thing. Yeah. My mom used to ring a bell. When we were kids, you could just run all over the place, you know, not like today. We'd run all over the neighborhood, and when it was time for dinner, she rang the bell. So,
They
who
could
knows?
be warning too. They could be a warning that's.
exactly. Yeah. So anything else?
Locally, there are these things that fold five. And I've heard locals describing as wiener rocks, but they're
Oh.
the size and shape of the
Okay.
But the material is not sandstone. It would be a similar material. However.
Huh. So the question is about wiener rocks. Okay, I don't have any answers. No, I would just say somebody ought to try playing one. I mean, especially if it's not sandstone. If it's, you know, is it a natural? I mean, it's natural shape or no?
It did seem to have been worked. And what I was
Oh.
told was maybe high processing. something
Oh.
like that.
Hmm.
For that size, but I don't know.
Yeah. Well,
There aren't natural wiener rocks. Have you ever seen one a natural wiener rock? I've seen these, but
Yeah.
not wiener rocks.
no, these are a little different.
Now wait, look at that bias, look at what you're doing.
Yeah,
This
yeah.
thing, Pueblo
County, I've seen maybe.
No, I'd like to see them.
Yeah.
I would say they're not naturally shaped, they must be shaped.
Yes. Yes.
Mhm.
Yes.
Because we would have seen them if they were unshaped, if they were natural. All of us would have seen one somewhere, hiking or on survey or
I don't
something.
know about that. You don't remember.
Hard to
what
buy.
I said. I have a fossil that was a worm coming in. like,
Oh. I mean, who knows?
And it came from Galveston.
Huh,
Looks like a tiny one.
mini wiener.
Mini wiener.
Yes,
Is there a fancy term for the fact that these singing rocks are found in various parts of the world? Would they have any communication among themselves? Or is this just an epiphenomenon or what would you
Okay.
use their term for that?
that's a great question. He's asking if, do I still need to repeat it or?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. He's wondering if the fact that they're found worldwide is, you know, has some kind of a name or meaning to that. That's a good question. I don't know. I mean, they have been found basically everywhere. So,
I mean, certain tribes in the US get together and then they would, one would play the singing stones and the other would say, hey, I'm gonna try to get some of those myself.
right.
What is that? But when you look internationally, it's very hard. Is it
Yeah.
very hard, or is there any kind of communication way back when?
I don't know. That's yeah. Well, I mean, that's a great question. I'm not sure how we'd answer it. But the fact that there are lithophones everywhere, made of different materials, maybe they don't look quite like this, but they make sounds basically the same way. And so what people were doing with them, we don't know. Were they communicating with each other somehow? I mean, it could, somebody was saying this, that could have been a way to warn people. I mean, this could, if you rang this, say in a canyon or something, how far would you hear it? I don't know. But if you really play it loud, I'm not playing it all the way loud, but
You just broke it.
and now it's broke. No, it's, so I can see it being a communication tool as well as music. And some of these, like this one, isn't as ringy in music. Like this one's real ringy. And this one, but this one is just loud. I mean, whew. So maybe that was used in a different way. I think that's a great question. Yeah.
I have two things.
Okay.
Do you have a range of densities that these stones are occur at? Or, you know, like how many pounds per cubic foot they
No.
weigh or something like that, or a specific gravity?
But that's a great thing. I should have done that probably.
Number two, if you're on your way down to the San Luis Valley down Interstate 25, stop at Orville Butte. Those rocks ring.
Oh, Huerfano Butte rocks ring? Okay.
I don't know if the site, I know the stuff at the top rings.
See
So
what?
it's a volcanic rock.
Okay.
It was possibly, don't quote me on this because I'm not certain, daytime.
A-site. Okay. Well, I'd like to look into that.
Now, that would be an interesting one because that was out there in the open where the Native Americans would live.
And shoot, they could have maybe played them up there
Yeah,
even.
it rings. It
Uh-huh.
really rings. This is a cool thing.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So would this group be willing to do a little project?
Thanks a lot.
He just volunteered to show us where they are.
Oh, well, definitely, I could do that for you.
Ah, there you go.
Yeah, see that?
Volunteer.
Yeah, okay. What's your name?
Don't tell her.
Yeah.
Well, one place, Wendy, Utah, Edge of Cedars State Park,
if they're a repository for all the tribes of the Four Corners area, well, several of the tribes of the Four Corners area in the pottery. I mean, I just visited there last week. They have a breastplate, ceremonial breastplate made from cough feathers
Oh,
that was discovered in Canyonlands in a cave.
wow.
And they estimate it to be 12 to 1300 years old.
Wow.
And it's very colorful. But the pottery, I mean, huge pots, very decorative, Chocolate Canyon, well, the Four Corners area. It's edge of Cedar State Park.
Okay, I've heard of that before.
They're a repository for mostly Indian artifacts. And they have quite a collection of visible. I mean, you see it behind glass, but the xylophone, no,
The lithophones,
the
yeah.
music props might be.
Okay, I better
And,
contact them and see.
One other thing, have you ever been to Aztec, Mexico?
Yes,
Aztec ruin,
yes.
the big ceremonial keep?
Mhm.
Okay.
I'd love to play one of these in a kiva or something, just
Yeah.
to hear what it sounds like. Because to me, it would be similar to maybe being in a cave,
Yeah.
like those stalactite. The acoustics in one of those might be really interesting
That one
for,
at Aztec, it's kind of unique because it has the 28 rooms
Yeah.
surrounding it with an outside entrance and inside entrance. And yeah, that's all. Hearing those in there, you've had.
wouldn't it be interesting? I'd like to just even hear them being played out at Great Sand Dunes, in the sand. Have you all gone to Great Sand Dunes? Probably most of you have. Have you noticed there's some interesting acoustical properties when you're down at the bottom of the sand, there's, right where the creek's running? Sometimes you can hear what people are saying who are way up on top. So be careful what you say
Talk about some.
when you're up there, but there are interesting acoustics, and a lot of these, not the ones right here, but the ones that we studied were found out in the sand dunes, in the deep sand. What does that mean as far as sound? So I've gotten permission from Fred Bunch to go out there and take some of these and play them in the sand dunes, away from the screaming children. Yeah.
We haven't done that either, is test to see how far the sound can vary.
Right.
If you're out where we found some of these blowouts east of the team field, you can imagine, how quiet it would be.
Right.
We're not sitting around a campfire. What I want to know is start ringing it and have somebody go out and see how far
Where it goes. Yeah.
It's gonna be a mile.
It could go a long ways. Yeah.
Out there,
Yeah. Yeah. I really want to go try that.
Me too.
Yeah. I have a lot of things I want to do. Yeah. Except I just had our first grandchild was born this week. So that's distracting me, but that's okay.
Your spare time is more limited.
Yeah. You have to make quick trips. But anyway, people come up and try these out and take a look and have fun. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Nice presentation.
Let's see, this one's still there.
Yeah, it's still valid.
We're just trying to throw the trash away.